The film begins with a Danish couple named Bjorn and Louise, who are enjoying a vacation in Tuscany, Italy, with their young daughter Agnes. While relaxing by the pool at their villa, they are approached by a Dutch man named Patrick, who politely asks if one of the nearby chairs is available. Bjorn kindly moves his belongings and lets Patrick sit there without hesitation. That evening, all the guests at the villa gather together for a group dinner. In the middle of the warm and relaxed atmosphere, Patrick stands up and apologizes for causing a small disturbance earlier at the resort. After that, he invites everyone to raise a toast and celebrate their holiday together. The next morning, Agnes suddenly realizes that her favorite stuffed rabbit is missing. The toy means a lot to her because she carries it everywhere for comfort and security. Bjorn immediately retraces their steps and searches through all the places they visited earlier that day. After spending quite a while looking for it, he finally manages to find the rabbit and returns to his family. When Bjorn comes back, he sees Louise spending time with Patrick, along with Patrick's wife Karen and their young son Abel. As the two families begin getting closer, Bjorn and Louise notice that Abel has difficulty speaking and seems far quieter than most children his age. Even so, Patrick and Karen treat his condition casually, as though it is completely normal to them. Not long after that, Patrick invites Bjorn's family to join them for lunch. During the conversation, Patrick learns that Louise is vegetarian, although she still occasionally eats fish. Patrick also explains that he and Karen live in a remote countryside village in the Netherlands. As the vacation continues, the two families slowly become more and more friendly with each other. They thought they had met the perfect family. This is Speak No Evil. Eventually, the holiday comes to an end, and Bjorn and Louise return home to Denmark. Sometime later, they receive a postcard containing a photo of both families together during the trip. On the back of the card, Patrick writes an invitation asking them to visit his home in the Dutch countryside. Since Patrick and Karen seemed incredibly kind during the vacation, Bjorn becomes interested in accepting the invitation. After discussing it for a while and even asking a friend for advice, they finally decide to travel to the Netherlands together with Agnes. Before long, they arrive at Patrick's house. But the home is located deep in a quiet rural area, far away from the city. The surroundings feel isolated and empty, with no other houses nearby. As soon as they arrive, Karen warmly welcomes them and shows them the room where they will be staying. Agnes is then asked to sleep in Abel's room, where a small mattress has already been prepared in the corner. Even though Louise seems slightly uncomfortable with the arrangement, she still tries to remain polite toward their hosts. Later that night, Patrick serves dinner for everyone. During the meal, he intentionally places a piece of meat onto Louise's plate and encourages her to try it. Louise politely refuses several times because she is vegetarian, but Patrick keeps pressuring her while treating the situation like a harmless joke. Not wanting to create tension or appear rude, Louise eventually gives in and eats the meat, even though she is clearly uncomfortable the entire time. Sometime later, while taking out the trash outside the house, Bjorn notices a small, separate building standing beside Patrick's home. Curious about what might be inside, he quietly walks over and tries peeking through the entrance. But at that exact moment, Abel suddenly approaches him and opens his mouth. Bjorn is shocked when he realizes that Abel has no tongue at all, which explains why the boy struggles to speak. Abel's empty and emotionless expression only deepens the strange feeling Bjorn has been trying to ignore ever since arriving at the house. Not long after that, they head back inside and continue talking together. But in the distance, Abel can suddenly be heard crying. Patrick calmly explains that Abel was born with a rare condition called aglossia, a disorder where someone is born without a tongue or with an extremely small one. Even though Patrick explains it casually, Louise begins to feel like something about this family is seriously wrong. The next day, they spend time exploring the countryside and eventually stop near a children's playground with a slide. Agnes wants to play, but Abel stands motionless in the middle of the slide and refuses to move. Louise repeatedly asks him to step aside, but Abel gives no reaction at all. Eventually, Louise brings the situation up to Patrick, but instead of handling it calmly, Patrick suddenly explodes with anger and aggressively scolds Abel in front of everyone. His outburst instantly makes the atmosphere uncomfortable, and Louise feels guilty watching Abel get humiliated so harshly because of her complaint. After returning home, Louise becomes more convinced that Patrick's family is not normal. She tells Bjorn that they should leave and return to Denmark as soon as possible. In her eyes, Patrick keeps crossing boundaries and making her feel deeply uncomfortable. But Bjorn still tries to stay positive. He convinces himself that maybe everything is simply the result of cultural differences and awkward misunderstandings. For a while, Louise's desire to leave begins to fade after Karen invites them out for dinner. But just before they leave the house, Louise realizes that Agnes will not be coming with them. Instead, Agnes and Abel will stay behind with a man named Muhajid, who has been hired to watch the children. Muhajid seems strangely familiar with both Abel and Agnes, and Patrick and Karen appear to trust him completely. Since Agnes looks happy and comfortable around him, Bjorn and Louise eventually agree to leave their daughter at the house. Once they arrive at the restaurant, Bjorn and Louise hope the evening will help repair the growing tension between them and their hosts. But once again, Patrick quickly ruins the mood. Even though Louise has already explained multiple times that she is vegetarian, Patrick deliberately orders a meat dish for her anyway. He treats the situation like a joke and keeps pushing her without caring about how uncomfortable she feels. Things become even more awkward when Patrick and Karen start acting overly intimate while dancing in front of them. Louise is clearly disturbed by how vulgar and inappropriate their behavior feels. Bjorn also begins losing his patience, but he continues holding back his frustration in order to avoid creating conflict with their hosts. After dinner is over, Bjorn becomes even more irritated when Patrick casually lets him pay for the entire meal. And on the drive back to the house, the atmosphere only grows more uncomfortable. Patrick blasts loud music through the car while driving aggressively through the dark countryside roads.
Patrick, can you turn down the music a bit?
Louise, who has already been emotionally drained since arriving at the house, finally reaches her breaking point. To her, Patrick and his family are slowly starting to reveal their true nature, and it feels deeply disturbing. Once they return to the house, Louise sees that Agnes is already asleep in Abel's room. Feeling exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed after the stressful evening, Louise decides to take a shower before going to bed. But while she is in the bathroom, she suddenly hears someone enter the room to brush their teeth. In the silence of the house, the small moment feels strangely unsettling, especially after Louise realizes that the person standing there is not Bjorn. After finishing her shower, Louise returns to the bedroom and finds Bjorn already lying in bed. The two of them share a quiet, intimate moment together, trying to calm themselves after the tension that has been building throughout the day. At the same time, Bjorn briefly notices the silhouette of someone standing behind the bedroom door, almost as if they are secretly watching them. But instead of confronting it, he chooses to ignore the strange presence and focus on comforting his wife. A little while later, Louise suddenly feels uneasy and decides to check on Agnes in Abel's room. But when she arrives, Agnes is nowhere to be found. Panic immediately sets in, and Louise rushes toward Patrick and Karen's bedroom. Inside, she discovers Agnes sleeping beside Patrick, who is completely naked. The sight instantly terrifies her. Without wasting another second, Louise grabs Agnes and carries her out of the room. At that moment, she finally decides that they need to leave the house immediately. Not long after that, Bjorn eventually agrees to leave Patrick's home. Early the next morning, they quietly pack their things, get into the car, and drive away from the isolated countryside house. But during the trip, Agnes suddenly realizes that her stuffed rabbit is missing. They search through the bags in the car but cannot find it anywhere. Since the toy means everything to Agnes and helps her sleep every night, Bjorn reluctantly decides to return to Patrick's house to retrieve it. Once they arrive, Bjorn steps out of the car and asks Louise to stay behind with Agnes while he goes inside. But only moments later, Agnes discovers that the rabbit had actually fallen underneath the car seat the entire time. Louise quickly heads inside to tell Bjorn the good news. However, when she enters the house, she is shocked to see Bjorn casually talking with Patrick as though nothing strange had happened the night before. At that point, Louise finally opens up and explains the real reason she wanted to leave. She admits that she has felt uncomfortable ever since arriving at the house. Patrick and Karen constantly ignored her boundaries, especially by continuing to serve her meat even though they knew she was vegetarian. She also talks about Patrick's rude behavior, the loud music, and the way Patrick and Karen acted inappropriately in front of them. In response, Patrick and Karen calmly apologize for making her uncomfortable. Patrick acts incredibly relaxed and dismisses everything as a simple misunderstanding. He insists that none of it was intentional and asks Bjorn and his family to stay for a few more days. He even promises that the rest of the visit will be much better. Bjorn, still too polite and hesitant to offend them, eventually gives in. And despite Louise still feeling uncertain deep down, they decide to stay at the house once again. Over the next few days, things seem a little calmer around the house. Louise spends time helping Karen clean the garden outside, while Bjorn goes out with Patrick to relax and have fun together. But the uneasy feeling never completely disappears. One day, while preparing something in the kitchen, Louise accidentally cuts her hand badly enough to make it bleed heavily. Since Bjorn believes Patrick has medical experience, he quickly asks him to help treat the wound. That is when Patrick suddenly admits something unexpected. He reveals that he is not actually a doctor like he previously claimed. In reality, he is unemployed and does not even have a stable job. The confession immediately makes Bjorn and Louise realize that many of Patrick's stories may have been lies meant to make himself appear more impressive in front of others. Later that night after dinner, Agnes and Abel decide to perform a dance for both families. Agnes happily dances like a normal child, trying her best to have fun. But Abel looks nervous the entire time, almost terrified of making a mistake in front of Patrick. The atmosphere suddenly changes when Abel fails to follow the movements the way Patrick wants. Patrick instantly explodes with anger and begins aggressively yelling at him in front of everyone. At one point, he even throws a glass in frustration because he thinks Abel is ruining the performance. Abel becomes frightened and starts crying, but Patrick keeps forcing him to continue dancing anyway. Watching the terrified child get humiliated like that finally pushes Bjorn too far. He walks over and shuts off the music, triggering a heated argument between him and Patrick. For the first time since arriving at the house, Bjorn openly shows how disgusted he is by the way Patrick treats Abel. Louise becomes overwhelmed watching the confrontation and eventually runs outside in tears, feeling like she cannot endure the situation any longer. Later that night, while trying to sleep, Bjorn is once again disturbed by the sound of Patrick angrily scolding Abel for crying. Not long after that, he hears a television still playing downstairs. Curious, Bjorn leaves the bedroom to see who is watching TV. But when he reaches the room, nobody is there. The television is simply left on by itself. After turning it off, Bjorn steps outside and slowly walks toward the small building beside Patrick's house. The same building that had already caught his attention earlier during the visit. Once inside, he discovers dozens of photographs showing Patrick and Karen with other families. But something about the pictures feels deeply wrong. In every photo, Patrick and Karen are standing beside different children. The child next to them is never the same. Bjorn also notices how the expressions on those children slowly change over time. In the earlier photos, they look happy and smiling. But in later pictures, their faces become fearful, empty, and emotionally broken. At that moment, Bjorn's growing suspicion finally turns into absolute horror. Inside the building, he discovers something far more terrifying than he ever expected. Hidden there is Abel's lifeless body lying inside a pool of water. The horrifying discovery finally makes Bjorn understand the truth. Patrick and Karen are not the harmless family they pretended to be all along. At that moment, Bjorn finally realizes the horrifying truth. He understands that he, Louise, and Agnes are in terrible danger. Without wasting another second, he rushes back in panic and tells his family that they need to leave immediately before something even worse happens to them. Bjorn quickly drives away from Patrick's house with Louise and Agnes inside the car. He desperately tries to get as far away from the isolated countryside as possible before Patrick notices they are gone. But during the drive, Bjorn suddenly realizes that another car is following them from behind. Its headlights remain at a distance while continuing to mirror every turn they make. Panicking, Bjorn swerves away from the main road and drives into a rocky dirt area, hoping to lose whoever is chasing them.
Yeah?
But the decision only makes things worse. Their car becomes stuck and refuses to move any further. When Bjorn spots a small house in the distance, he decides to run there for help. He leaves Louise and Agnes inside the car, hoping he can quickly find someone and return. But when he reaches the house, nobody is there. The empty building only makes him more desperate and confused. And before heading back, Bjorn notices a man approaching his car from afar. The moment he returns, Louise and Agnes are already gone. The car sits completely empty and silent, and Bjorn instantly realizes something terrible has happened. In total panic, he begins searching the area while calling out for his wife and daughter. During the search, he finds Agnes's stuffed rabbit lying on the ground. The toy confirms his worst fear. Agnes has been taken. Desperate and terrified, Bjorn runs toward the road while continuing to scream for his daughter. Not long after that, a car finally approaches him. But it is not help. Inside the vehicle are Patrick and Karen, who have already captured Louise and Agnes. With no other choice left, Bjorn reluctantly gets into the car, even though he now fully understands the monsters they truly are. Sometime later, Patrick stops near another vehicle waiting in a remote location. Standing there is Muhajid, the same man who had previously watched Agnes and Abel back at the house. His presence finally confirms that he has been involved in Patrick and Karen's plan from the very beginning. Soon after that, Muhajid forcibly separates Agnes from Louise. Terrified, Agnes tries to run back toward her mother, but Karen immediately restrains her. Bjorn desperately tries to protect his daughter, but Patrick brutally beats him down before he can do anything. Then comes the horrifying truth behind Abel. At that moment, everything finally becomes clear. Patrick and Karen have done this many times before. During vacations, they deliberately approach other families and slowly gain their trust. Once the families become comfortable around them, Patrick and Karen invite them back to their isolated home in the Netherlands. That is why every child in those old family photographs looks so empty, frightened, and emotionally broken. None of them were ever truly part of Patrick and Karen's family. They were all stolen victims, trapped in the same nightmare. After taking Agnes away, Patrick drives Bjorn and Louise to a remote area surrounded by dirt and massive rocks. Once they arrive, he forces them out of the car and orders them to remove their clothes. By that point, Bjorn and Louise have completely lost hope. Terrified and emotionally broken, they obey without resistance. They are then forced to walk down into a lower rocky area while Patrick and Karen remain standing above them, silently watching. Neither Bjorn nor Louise even tries to fight back anymore. The fear and trauma have already destroyed them mentally. Then the nightmare reaches its most horrifying point. At the end of the film, Agnes is shown living with Patrick and Karen just like the other children before her. Her face now looks empty, emotionless, and deeply sad, exactly like Abel once did. And after having her tongue removed, Agnes can no longer speak or cry out for help. Meanwhile, Patrick and Karen continue living their lives as though nothing ever happened. And as the film closes, it becomes clear that they are already preparing to search for another family to become their next victims. So the moral of the story is never trust a guy who forces a vegetarian to eat meat and still makes you pay for dinner.